So in our previous two podcasts, we were talking about the case of notorious serial killer Earle Nelson, who destroyed many families and good people across the west coast of the United States and the central U.S. before coming to Canada and bringing this destruction with him. Now, we do this as a public service. We remind you that listener discretion is advised. We're talking about aspects of the case that have been featured in published reports, but this part of the case will feature his decision to come to Canada and continue his killing spree above the 49 parallel. Now, on June 8, 1927 in Winnipeg, 14-year-old Lola Cohen disappeared after leaving her home to sell artificial flowers door to door. On June 10th, another local woman, Emily Patterson, went missing. She was discovered later that evening by her husband, raped and strangled to death under her son's bed. She had also been bludgeoned with a claw hammer. Patterson's husband discovered her body while kneeling at the bedside to say evening prayers. Now, upon investigation, police determined that several items were missing from the Patterson home, including a whipcord suit, Patterson's gold wedding ring, the family Bible, and $70 in Canadian $10 bills. A knife bearing burn marks and nicks was also left behind the home. Police found the knife to be consistent with that which had cut the lamp cord used in the May and Anthony murders the week prior. The day after Patterson's murder, Fred Englund, a local jeweler in Winnipeg, unknowingly purchased Patterson's wedding ring from Nelson for $350, and clothing stolen from the home was subsequently discovered for sale in a local second-hand store. Both the jewelers and clothing store owner would possibly identify Nelson and the man who provided them the ring and clothing. Now, Nicholas Tabor, a barber who owned a shop next door to the second-hand store, told police he had given the man resembling Nelson a shave, haircut, and massage on the afternoon of June 10th. Now, while cutting the man's hair, Tabor noticed dried blood on his scalp as well as scratch marks. When he inquired about them, the man reportedly became agitated and requested that Tabor not touch them. While performing a citywide search of boarding houses in Winnipeg on June 12th, they entered the boarding house of Mrs. August Hill on 133rd Smith Street, where Nelson had recently lodged. Upon a search of his room, the decaying nude corpse of Cowan was discovered under the bed. Cowan's body, unlike that of the other victims, had reportedly been mutilated in a manner reminiscent of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Her clothing belongings were missing, and it was evident the bed had been slept in, leading the police to determine that Nelson had spent the night sleeping with the body beneath the bed. After discovery of Cowan's body, Winnipeg City Council posted a $1,500 reward for information leading to the conviction of the criminal degenerate responsible. This reward would subsequently become a point of dispute after several individuals came forward with information pertaining to Nelson's whereabouts, among them including a motorist who claimed to have given Nelson a ride from Emerson to Winnipeg on the day Cowan went missing. Now, assuming that Nelson had fled to the States, Canadian police sent descriptions of him to all U.S. police stations and post offices. In the intervening days, sightings of Nelson were reporting in Regina and Boissevain, Manitoba. On June 16, 27, constables in Killarney, a Manitoba border town, 20 kilometers from the North Dakota border, arrested a man named Virgil Wilson, who fit Nelson's description. His demeanor was reportedly so calm and cooperative that the constables assumed he had the wrong man. Now, Wilson was incarcerated in the local jail, but managed to escape the same evening. Nelson made the mistake of trying to catch the same train that was transporting members of the Winnipeg police, and was recaptured 12 hours after his initial escape. He was officially arrested the next morning by an officer from the Crystal City Police on the rail line 70 kilometers east of Wacopa. Nelson was eventually taken to the Rupert Street Police Station in Winnipeg, where he was photographed, fingerprinted, measured, and prepared for identification lineups. Nearly 4,000 spectators arrived at his arrival point outside the station, hoping to glimpse the accused man. Now, photographs of Nelson taken by Winnipeg police were shortly sent out to police departments throughout the U.S., and this resulted in positive identifications from witnesses in Illinois and California who claimed the man was the same unknown renter that it had encounters with. Now, though he maintained that his identity was that of Virgil Wilson, Fingerprints forwarded to Winnipeg from the San Fran Police Department from his early arrests confirmed his identity as Earle Nelson. His fingerprints matched those left behind at several of the crime scenes, as well as the teeth marks found on the victims. Now, initially, Nelson admitted to his crimes, bluntly telling reporters, "I only do my lady killings on Saturday nights." However, he would subsequently retract his admission and claim he was innocent. Upon an interview with the Manitoba Free Press shortly after his arrest, he said, "I'm charged with 2 murders, but I'm not the one who done it." When asked about the various persons in the U.S. and Canada who had identified him as a strangler, he simply responded, "All of them are wrong." Despite attempts on part of both U.S. and Canadian law enforcement agencies to elicit confessions, he refused to admit to any of the murders of which he was suspected or accused. Now, at the time of his arrest, Nelson was wanted on 6 U.S. cities and was held to be tried in a Manitoba court for the murders of both Cohen and Patterson. He was also charged with 2 counts of attempted molestation and 1 count of burglary. His trial was scheduled to begin June 27, 1927, but postponed at the request of his attorney, and instead began November 1st at the Winnipeg Court's Law Building. The case was prosecuted by R.B. Graham and overseen by Justice Andrew Dysart. Now, Nelson was defended by the court-appointed James H. Stitt. Nelson's ex-wife Mary Martin testified against him, claiming that he was absolutely insane. Additionally, 60 individuals from both Canada and U.S. testified, many placing Nelson at the scenes of the various crimes or linking him to property stolen from victims' homes. A jail guard who oversaw Nelson throughout the trial noted that he had become particularly obsessed with a certain biblical passage from the book of Proverbs, which read, "My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways, for a whore is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. She also lieth in wait as for a prey, and increases the transgressors among men." Now, closing statements in Nelson's trials were completed on November 5th, 27. After 40 minutes, the jury obviously sentenced him to death. Now, relatives of victims McCollin and Cowan visited Nelson in prison after the conviction, and he continued to proclaim his innocence. Now, in late December 27, Stitt submitted a 30-page document to the Minister of Justice, Ardis LaPointe, petitioning for clemency on the grounds that Nelson was insane and that his personal history had been unfairly presented to the jury via the press. Now, the eloquent, even moving document consisted of 20 affidavits from persons who had known Nelson throughout his life and swore he was in a position to know full well the character and mentality of said Earle Nelson, that verily believed without exaggeration or mental reservation that he had been for a long period of time a person of unsound mind. In one of the affidavits, Mrs. L.J. Casey, who had employed Nelson as a groundskeeper in 26, attested to this, noting that she heard him laughing and talking to himself all the time. One day, while I happened to be there, he sat right outside in the drenching rain, looking at the sky without a coat, until he was soaked through. Despite the abundance of affidavits, the appeal was denied, and Nelson's execution was scheduled for the second Friday of January. Now, Nelson was eventually executed by hanging at 7:30 a.m. on January 13, 1928, at the Vaughan Street Jail in Winnipeg. His final words were, "I forgive those who have wronged me." Now, when his identity was still unknown, law enforcement surmised that Nelson was a predator who possessed a dual personality, linking him to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. However, his modus operandi was clear even to investigators at the time of the crime's occurrences. Nelson's victims were mostly landladies, whom he would approach on the pretext of renting a room. Many of these victims were targeted after being placed room for rent advertisements in local papers. Now, Nelson, who was well versed in Christian theology, often studied his worn Bible, using to keep his victim at ease and off guard. Once he had gained their trust and was able to access their homes, he would kill them, almost always by strangling, and sometimes engaging in necrophilia with the corpse. He would often hide the body, leaving under the nearest bed. In several of the murders committed in Portland, he went to additional lengths to conceal the body, hiding in the attic or steamer trunk went in the house. Other victims were concealed in closets or behind furnaces in the house. At the peak of his killing spree, he was killing once every 3 weeks on average. His killing sometimes occurred in spurts. His last victim, Emily Patterson, has been his 5th victim in only 10 days. Though there are many extant documents regarding Nelson and his trial, few of them contain psychiatric information regarding his pathology. Now, during Nelson's incarceration leading up to his trial, he was examined by Dr. Alvin T. Mathers, chief of the psychiatric ward in Winnipeg General Hospital, on 5 separate occasions between July 27th and October 24th, 27. Based on these sessions, Mathers testified in court, "I did not find any evidence that to me that would constitute insanity." Now, Nelson again was the first serial murderer in American history whose crimes were subject to widespread media attention in newspaper, national magazines, and the then new medium of the radio. His crimes and trial received international media attention, appearing in newspapers across the States, Canada, and Australia. His confirmed murder count, which exceeded 20, remained a record high for nearly 50 years until the discovery of Dean Quarles' crimes in 1973. According to crime historians Harold Schachter and David Everett, again, he was the first serial sex murderer in 20th century America. Now, though Nelson refused to admit to any of the crimes of which he was accused, he has been linked to a total of 22 murders between 26 and 27. The victims consisted nearly exclusively of women, along with one male infant child. Now, the other possible victims include several in San Francisco in 1925 and 26, in San Francisco as well, Philadelphia and Stockton. Now, again, Nelson murder spree, that movie Shadow of a Doubt, which you have to take a look at, obviously not as gory as the aspects of the case, but it was he was called the Merry Widow Murderer. And Alfred Hitchcock has said in many published reports he was not say inspired, but his fascination with killing and serial killer came from this. How can somebody seem so calm on the outside with several people be so violent and cruel on the outside? Who knows? But all I know, this is my perspective. The reason why he was caught, because he came to Canada and he was sloppy. He could have went on for years and years and years, but was it because of syphilis that was in his system, because of his parents was passed on? Was it because of that injury? What caused him to be like that? We'll never know. But the energy it took to kill all these people. There's one lawyer that I talked to years ago who talked about the Alan Legere serial killer case where that was only a half dozen victims. He said that's bad enough, but you can't compare Alan Legere to this guy. He said this guy was almost like an Olympic athlete, the way he would kill people. And when you work as a reporter like I have covering murders and cases like this, you have to study them and you have to really understand. Like, where was the motivation for this person to do this? There was no pornography back there. There was no, TV shows or radio shows that glorified serial killers, not like in 2021. So the Ted Bundy, the famous deathbed confessions that pornography causes, like this guy was more prevalent than Ted Bundy, and it's still a massive mystery why this person was the way he was. Anyway, this is the end of our three-part podcast series. If you could like to give a comment or just your basically thought about the whole process. But I know the Canadian judicial system brought this guy to justice. And in this case, the Canadian justice system did right in hanging this guy. Because if he would have escaped, how many more Canadians he would have killed? Anyway, thanks for listening. And again, I appreciate the patience on the three-parter. Like I said, it's a big case to cover. And, as a person who covered Alan Legere, I always wondered where he got inspiration. Did Alan Legere ever read about this case?